All right, so welcome everyone. Nice to have you here. Today we are going to be answer some commonly asked questions from social media. The first question I have is actually for you, Miguel. Can you introduce yourself really briefly?
Sure. I am Miguel Ballester. I'm the head of product management, and together with our team, then we take care of all the requirements and launching the products that we have in the market.
So we recently launched the Fairphone 5, right? Can you tell me a little bit more about the Fairphone 5?
Sure. So Fairphone 5 is our latest device. And the first time that we make a quite special selection on the chipset. We have a chipset that for the techies in the room is a 6490. It's a chipset that comes more from the IoT devices, so that's not the regular smartphone type of chipsets, but it's a chipset that allows us to provide longer software support, which is something that we find very important. So that's one thing. On the other hand, it's a device with an OLED screen, which is the first time that we do. That allows us to deliver a product that is a little bit lighter and thinner as well, with very good display performance.
There was quite a lot of people who were actually wanting us to do an OLED screen on our devices, right? So that's super nice.
Yeah.
I remember also something about the teardrop notch that some people preferred something different.
A lot of people don't like that. So our latest display has a punch hole. So the camera is behind that punch hole. It looks more stylish and a bit better from a design perspective.
Nice. Well, speaking about the camera,
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the camera specs of the phone?
Sure. As you can see on the back of your phone, you will see 3 holes, but it has 2 cameras, and I'll explain the third one later. So we have actually the 3 cameras, including the front camera, the selfie camera, is 3 50 megapixels cameras. The image sensors are different for each camera, but the main cameras have 2 Sony image sensor, the 800 and the 858. Yeah, we've worked a lot on new things like face recognition and smoother transition between the wide and the ultra wide cameras. So in general, like a very well-rounded camera. The third hole that people often ask is for a time of flight sensor that allows you for faster focusing also for certain conditions, better low light performance, and a super night mode as well. So in general, like a bit more rounded camera, and great performance so far, very well received. So
yeah, nice. And actually, speaking of performance, and you also mentioned the chipset and the IoT, it being an IoT chipset that we can support for longer. That means that we will be supporting this phone for longer, right? And that brings me to you, Stephanie. Can you introduce yourself really quickly?
Yeah, I'm Stephanie Littlewood. I'm the software delivery manager for our products in Fairphone, including the Fairphone 5.
So IoT chipset that allows us to provide support for longer, right? How does that work actually?
As Miguel was referring, it's the Qualcomm QCM 6490 chipset, and it has extended life support with Qualcomm. And our special partnership with Qualcomm enables us to ensure that we can offer an extended support and extended software maintenance years as a result.
How long?
We're offering about 8 years, but we will of course aim to do longer, as we always do.
The Fairphone 2 got 7 years of software support, right, which is pretty unheard of for the industry, and we see it being adopted a little bit more now, which is great. But then that also brings us to the other question that people are asking is if the Fairphone 5 will receive major Android updates, and how many, and basically for how long?
So we're aiming for 5 major Android upgrades through the life of the Fairphone 5. But with that, we will also offer monthly security patch updates, Google security patch updates, for 3 years, and then bi-monthly updates for the remainder of our term.
This is really important, right? Because once those security updates stop with other phones, then you can't really use other apps anymore, right? It becomes a bit less safe, your banking information, things like that.
Exactly. So some banking apps might stop, or other apps with higher security requirements may also stop working. And you're more likely to also have hackers have access to your device if you don't have access to security patch updates.
Yeah. Well, keeping your phones for a really long time requires them to be able to function for that long as well, right? Which is something that we focus on. But another thing that we also focus on is, the sustainability side and the fair side of the Fairphone 5. And that brings me to a question to you. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Angela Jorns. I'm the team lead for Fair Materials. I'm part of the Impact Innovation team who looks after the sustainability topics at Fairphone.
The phone itself, it's made out of many, many materials, right? But we try to incorporate certain fair materials in the phone. Can you tell me some of the fair materials of the phone?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually quite proud because the Fairphone 5 has quite a lot of fair materials, or more fair materials than we ever had before. We focus on specifically 14. These are the materials that have the biggest social and environmental impacts in their supply chain. So we really want to work on improving those. So in Fairphone 5, we have more recycled materials than we had before. We really worked hard with our suppliers to integrate those. It's 36% of the phone's weight. And we also connected more fair mined materials to our supply chain, like lithium, for example, which is in our battery, because we wanted to put a focus on having a fair battery that is replaceable and also has fair materials in it.
You can actually see physically in your hands that change happening, right? We are actually incorporating so many more of these materials, which then brings us to some of the questions of what do we mean when we hear the word climate conscious for the Fairphone?
Yeah, for Fairphone, climate conscious means three things. The first one is avoiding emission, the second one is reducing emissions, and the third one is supporting climate projects. So actually, you've touched on the lifespan of the product already. That goes to the first point. Avoiding emissions is very important, and we know that the emissions mainly come from the manufacturing, the producing of the phone. So if we can keep the phones for as long as possible, the phones that already exist, we don't need to produce new ones. And that's why the Fairphone 5 we support for a minimum of 8 years, and it also has a 5-year warranty. And we make sure that we reuse old phones and we sell refurbished phones as well. So that all goes into prolonging the lifespan and therefore avoiding actually emissions. Then the reduction of the emissions also comes from two things. So one is using recycled materials because they are already in a secondary loop. They don't need to be mined anymore. That's why they have actually less emissions attached to them. But also making sure that in our manufacturing processes, renewable energy is used. So our final assembly is already assembling our phones with 100% renewable energy now. And our battery supplier is actually committed to producing our batteries with 100% renewable energy from next year onwards. And then the third thing is the climate projects, where we invest into projects that reduce emissions and work with communities locally. And these are projects that are certified by the gold standard, which has very strict requirements on what can be certified as a emission reduction projects, making sure that these are projects that are in addition to the reduction projects that are already happening, and that it contributes to the sustainable development goals as well.
Nice. And you mentioned that suppliers, they're really willing to work with Fairphone as well to improve conditions and 100% renewable energy, things like that. Fairphone also works with factories in terms of living wages, right? People want to know, what is it? How does it work? What are the living wages bonuses that we pay out?
Yeah, so actually with Fairphone 5, we are now paying more living wage bonuses than we have been doing previously. Until now, we've paid living wage bonuses for the workers that assembled our phone, so the final manufacturer. And now with Fairphone 5, we are actually also providing living wage bonuses for workers who manufacture parts of the phone, like the vibration motor or the battery. And I think in 2022, we paid out more than $300,000 in living wage bonuses to around 2,000 workers and their families. And I think that will increase now with the Fairphone 5.
Wow. That's actually, that's really nice, because then we're trying to bridge that gap, right? And hopefully other companies can also join us in those efforts and actually implement it. There's this other question that comes up very often as well, because we're talking about, like fair materials, fair specs and longevity and keeping your phone for a really long time. Yet we still release a new phone maybe Mika, you can tell me how often we release a new phone, and the question being, how do we decide to release a new phone and why do we release a new phone?
Yeah, in the last years has been every 2 years or a little bit longer. Previously in the past at Fairphone it was longer than that. What we see, what is important is that we keep on supporting the old phones, right? Like, would not be indeed very sustainable to launch new phones and expect that people kind of migrate from one to the other one. What we also see is that in our company growth and with our impact goals that we have, it is important to be very relevant in the market as well, and that we are able to provide a phone that is updated so that people have the interest again in Fairphone and we are able to push forward our impact goals. Angela was already mentioning how we have improved on some of these goals, and every phone, every project, if you want, that we put in the market is a new opportunity to change things with suppliers, to get a little bit deeper, to do things a little bit wider, while indeed we keep on supporting our phones like the previous models for as long as possible. So we keep on doing that. So now you mentioned Fairphone 2 was supported for 7 years. Fairphone 3 is still supported, Fairphone 4 as well. And then also with every phone that we launch, we even on software longevity, as Stephanie was mentioning, our promises can go even further, right? Because that chipset is new, with a very smart team behind being able to push it forward. Now we are able to promise 8 years, which is something that we would not be able to have promised with Fairphone 4, for example, with that chipset. So every step is a phone that is more fair, more sustainable, and becomes of a bigger artifact to change the industry, actually.
Yeah. Fairphone is also a small team still, right? We're trying to grow, but internally we work really hard to be able to continue to push these security and software updates, and there's a lot that goes behind it, right? Like Google certifications, all of that stuff. Can you tell me maybe a little bit more about that?
We need to make sure that the software that we release is Google certified, of course, and need to make sure that for us to provide software support for 8 years, that we do the major Android OS upgrades as well. We're a really small team. We have a team of engineers in Taipei. We have our software longevity team that takes over the software and looks after extending the life of the software here in Amsterdam. And we all work quite closely together to look at issues that are raised by end customers or even by our internal tests, make sure that we prioritize issues as well as possible, but also, of course, keeping in line with our requirements for Google security patch updates.
Yeah, nice. And we do this now for all of our devices, right, that are still in place.
So we have the Fairphone 3 and 3 Plus, which we're still providing security patch updates for, the Fairphone 4 and the Fairphone 5.
Is there anything anyone else would like to add? Something I missed, maybe?
Maybe just a small comparison, because we often talk a lot about material supply chain. That's something that is very much there in our external communications, but software chain is also an interesting one and a complex one as well. There are so many parties that need to do a piece of the software before we are able to release it, right? Like a chipset manufacturer, Google themselves, but also, for example, in our case, we get a lot of requirements from network operators. Then in the end, it's us like putting all that together into a software that we release, and making sure that all those pieces stay, let's say, fresh over these 8 years, and we are able to continue supporting the software. It's a complex task,
yeah.
But luckily we've grown a lot of knowledge internally, and we, over the different Fairphones, that's why we can promise now 8 years support. So that's really, really good.
Yeah, that's a big win, I think. That's super nice. All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much for answering these questions. And of course, if anybody has any other questions, please just leave them in the comments below, and we will do this again at some point and answer as many questions as you have. But yeah, thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you at the next one.
Right? Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for organizing.